Hello, everyone. Welcome to Merixstudio's live session. Big thanks for deciding to spend the next hour or so with us. If you're watching us live, please let me know if you can see and hear us correctly, because we will be recording this session and you will be able to rewatch it, but we need to know that everything's all right. Joining me today are two very special guests. My first guest is Celina Jerome from the Gwichin Tribal Council. Hi, Celina, how are you?
Van Gwinzi, from Inuvik in the Northwest Territories in Canada's Western Arctic. I would just like to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you today from the traditional lands of the Gwichin and the Inuvialuit people.
Thank you very much for joining us and for accepting the invitation, Celina. My other guest is Kaniewska from Merixstudio. Hi, Kasia, how are you?
Hi, hello. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. I'm really excited to have you here. And I can already tell you that it will be a very fascinating discussion. Thanks to my guests and thanks to the topics that we are going to cover, because we are going to focus on technology in language revitalization, as well as the challenges and opportunities of language revitalization. So if you have any questions or comments to my guests, feel free to leave them in the chat box and we will answer them after the discussion. Okay, I can see that all's good with the audio and with the video, so I think we can start. All right, so if you Google Gwichin, you will find out that it is a severely endangered language, according to UNESCO. In the 80s, there were about 1,200 speakers. Now the estimates vary around 400 and 500. So my first question would be to Celina. Could you give us some background on the current situation of Gwichin right now, from your perspective, because I know that you're dealing with language revitalization, so you definitely have some insights to share.
Yes, thank you. I would just like to say that I started working in language revitalization in January of 2021, and it's brand new to me. So this whole first year was a learning curve, and it was very interesting to go out there and to see what was going on within the language. So if we start with the Statistics Canada census data that was done in 2016, they stated that there was less than 295 people in Canada that spoke the Gwichin language. Now, since 2016, or 6 years ago, we have had Gwichin speaking people pass away. So the number has since declined. But we also have Gwichin people who live in Alaska in the United States. And we also have Gwichin people that live in the Yukon. And right now we have two dialects that we speak in the Gwichin language. One is the Gwichin dialect, and the other is the Tetlit dialect. So I'd like to start with how this all began and why we are in this situation today. Let's go back to the days of residential school era, when our grandparents, who were 3 or 4 years old at the time, were taken away from their families. Our grandparents, when they were that age, were living in a language, or in a camp setting. They were on the land with their family. They were immersed in the Gwichin language. They were taught how to survive on the land. They were taught how to hunt. They were taught how to make their own clothing, and they were nomadic people. So they followed the caribou to keep going, to keep surviving. Now, when they were taken away from their families, their loving homes, their safe homes, their healthy homes, and put into an institution where they were stripped of their own human rights, where there was physical, mental, psychological, and sexual abuse happening. These children were fluent in the Gwichin language before then, and all of a sudden they're taken into these institutions, and all of a sudden they're punished because they couldn't speak English. They've never heard a word of English. All they knew was the Gwichin language. And so can you imagine how a child of 4 or 5 years old who has never heard the English language, and then you are getting reprimanded because you don't know how to speak the language or the English language? This is why we are in our state today. It's because Indigenous people were made to feel ashamed of their culture and their language. They lost their voices while in residential school because if they spoke up, they were punished. We are still dealing with the effects of residential school today. And I speak to many people who know the language. I speak to people who understand the language. But for them to speak it, it brings back or it triggers them to a time where they weren't allowed to do that. So, so that's why we're in our state today. And we do have other people, you know, who came back from residential school and took their power back and made an effort to learn their language. And and so I guess my question is today, you know, the churches inflicted this harm on the Gwich'in people. So I'd like to know how the churches are working with the language departments today and helping revitalize the language, or where they're going to start. So that's just my opening.
Yeah.
Today we do have participants who are actively learning the language with mentors. And we do have online Gwichin classes. And we have instructors who are located in Alberta. We have instructors who are located in the Yukon. And then we have participants who are in the NWT, the Yukon, and Alberta. So they come together at least 3 times a week for an hour and a half, and they learn the Gwichin language. They have created their own document to go by. So it's like their own little curriculum that they've developed and how they want to learn the language. And it's basic. It's, you know, introductions. It's how are you? It's the weather. It's how you're feeling today. Um, just what's going on in your daily life. All right. And so the people who are in this group, they practice all year round virtually. And one of the things that they really like doing is an on the land immersion camp, going back to the land, living the traditional lifestyle, working with traditional harvested meats and fish. And what they do is they just speak in the language at the camp. And so we believe that, you know, when you're out on the land, this language, the Gwichin language, is dormant in all of us. And when we go to the land, that's where it just like comes naturally. And a short little story to go with that. A lady who was on an immersion camp last year, she grew up in the Gwichin language. Her grandparents raised her up on the land, strictly on the land. And her grandparents spoke only the Gwichin language to her. But when she was taken to residential school, she lost it. She didn't practice it every single day because obviously they weren't allowed. However, when she decided to retire from her work, she thought, you know what, I'm going to get my language back. And so she started taking these classes. And all of a sudden, it was just coming back to her, you know, like the language was coming back to her. And all of a sudden she was telling instructors, okay, this is how my grandparents said that word. And she was kind of like bringing back the old style of the language. So when we talk about on the land immersion, that's where we need to go. And I do believe that's where people want to be while trying to learn the language, is on the land.
Yeah, I imagine it's the most effective because you are close to people, and as you said, you are also close to nature. And from what I know from you and Kasia told me, the Gwichin language is very close to the environment, to what is around. So I imagine that it must be a bit easier to bring this language back to you.
Oh, definitely. I speak to many people in my job as language revitalization or manager of language revitalization. I find a lot of people call me and they come forth with their concerns, but I also question them about, you know, the language and, you know, have you tried learning it, or do you have somebody that that could mentor you? And you know, like what would be the easiest way? And again, the majority of them all state, like, I find that I learn the language better when I'm on the land. It doesn't matter if I'm in a camp setting up the river or if I'm out harvesting berries on the land. Just being there, you know, it just, I feel like I know more of the Gwichin language from that perspective.
Yeah, I see. And now that you mentioned land, I'm actually wondering about this tech part of language revitalization, because being close to speakers, to the language is one thing, but then technology can also, open up numerous possibilities of exercising language, of trying to reignite it in you. But there's also this view that technology can be kind of a mixed blessing. So on the one hand, there are these opportunities, but on the other hand, if you think of the online world, it's English that's lingua franca, right? And it may be viewed as something that discourages the use of your heritage language. And before, Celina, I go back to you and ask you about how it's like with Gwichin. I was wondering about Kasia's point of view on that, because I know that Kasia also has some background in linguistics, apart from being a UX designer.
Yes, actually I do. I've studied Swedish at university. So actually this project was very interesting to me, taking into account my background. And answering your question, Alexandra, it can definitely be a mixed blessing, because on one hand, it's easier for you to communicate in English, right? So let's take an example of Sweden that I'm a bit more familiar with, where people, I know people who have lived there for many, many years, and still they do not speak the language, just because everyone else is very fluent in English, so there is no need actually to speak the language. And we have an example of a Gwichin from what we've learned during the development of the of the app. There is actually no going around it. You cannot learn about Gwichin without actually speaking it, as the language actually is built around a lot of metaphors, a lot of descriptions of the nature of the world around you. So from my point of view, as a language that was initially very much a spoken language, it's very unique how it depicts nature, how it depicts, for example, the seasons, the names of the months, like the February, sun's getting higher. So that's the direct translation. Or the March, Eagle's month. Or even the July, when people gather up together. So these are examples of pretty much direct translations of the Gwichin into English, showing that, how actually the language shaped the way people think about nature and the things that surround them. So certainly it's impossible actually to just use English in this case and understand the whole complexity of the cultural background and the story. Of course, I would say that, for example, groups on Facebook would help you to find people who are also interested in language such as Gwichin. And there are some groups, as we've done some research on when we were starting the project. But on the other hand, there is this risk, I would say, that you would switch to English instead of practicing the language. So, as you said, it's a mixed blessing for sure.
Yeah, as we like to say, it depends, right?
Of course, always.
Yeah. Actually, when preparing for our conversation, I've read about different ways in which technology can support language revitalization. I've read about, for example, Motorola introducing a Cherokee language interface, and as you, Kasia, said, there are also Facebook groups. But I'm wondering about your experience, Celina. How do you use technology at your community for this reigniting interest in Gwichin? Does it help, or maybe is it this mixed blessing?
When I think of technology and working with a language, you have to remember that the language department is to service everyone in the Gwichin settlement area, but we also have beneficiaries all over the world. And one of the things that I wanted to do when I started my position was to promote the Gwichin language, get it out there that it's okay to start learning the language again. And if you needed any type of resources, then by all means, you contact me, or contact somebody who knows the language and see how we can work together. And so I noticed that when I started using promotions on our Facebook social media platform, I started getting questions, and I started getting emails from people saying, I really want to learn the language. Like, how can I do that?
Mhm.
And so then I would direct them into our online learning, Gwichin learning classes. And I would just introduce the person to the instructors. And then they would, contact them and say, okay, what's your level of knowledge in the Gwichin language? So then we know where to start teaching
Mhm.
the Gwichin language. So for me, that was, reaching out to people, not just within the Gwichin settlement area, but I was reaching people in the South as well. Um, when we talk about learning the language, I talk to my mom and my aunts, and I talk to elders from the communities a lot, and they say, if you're going to learn the language, you need to be immersed in the language every single day. You
Mhm.
need to hear those words. You need to know how they are pronounced. And thank goodness, I have a computer that, has a CD player on it.
Mhm.
And I have my late Auntie Bertha Francis CD in there. So sometimes first thing in the morning, that's what I'm listening to. And I'm listening to how she pronounces words because, as an example, I went up to my hometown of Tetleget, Fort McPherson over the weekend, and I went to go see my Auntie Mary, my mom's eldest sister, and she's about 84. And I told my mom, I said, I have to acknowledge my auntie and talk to her in Gwichin. I said, so I can't use Mary, Auntie Mary. I said, what do I call her? And she said, you call her Sheikh I. And I said, okay. And so I was all excited. I was all happy. I went into my Auntie Mary's house and I told her, Drin Gwinzi Sheikh I. And she looked at me and she said, Sheikh I. And she said, now you try. And I said, Sheikh I. And she's like, yes, that's how you say it. Otherwise, that meaning has or that word has a totally different meaning. So you have to be very careful. So having audio really helps because it's repetitive and you could hear it anytime you want. And one of the suggestions I got was, playing it at home while,
Mhm.
you're cleaning or you're cooking supper or while the girls are doing homework or, playing with Lego, just have it on in the background because it's going to be embedded in your memory, you know? So
Mhm.
that's kind of my thought on, technology. But one of my future goals for this department is to have all of our resources, whether it's printed, is to get them in audio, for that
Mhm.
very purpose. So people can hear it and people could start practicing the sounds. So, and as Katarzyna said, Gwichin is a very complex language. And, one word, and I'll give you an example, is show, and it means bear. But then you have jo, which means wolf,
So
so
close, right?
right? So you have to
Mhm.
really distinguish the words and really know how to practice it. And even as I practice with my mom, driving on the highway, many times she's like, nope, that's not the way. This is how. And I have to keep redoing it. And, trying to remember that every single day, that's where you have to take the time out and really devote yourself to the language.
Mhm. Yeah, so it's like training a muscle, basically. If you don't do it regularly, it won't really pay off. Mhm.
Exactly. And we have six editions of it, the Gwich'in dictionary. So we have all these different resources that eventually we want to put online. But we also want to do, the audio for every one of those words. So this is why the app
Mhm.
is so important because with this app, you could open it anytime you want. Like, if you take a 2-minute break, open it and listen to the words because it has audio from our elders from Sigechik and Tetleget. So yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, because just a note, recently we've released application for learning Gwichin. We worked on together with the Gwichin Tribal Council, and you can already download it and try learning Gwichin on your own. So my question would be, How did you come up with the idea for building a mobile application for learning Gwichin? I suppose that having these audio files was one motivation, but what other reasons did you have for that?
So when I spoke to, so like I said, I started this job in January of 2021. And at that time, Andrew Sienski was a language revitalization specialist here in the department. And he and I spoke about this app because he wanted to create an app specifically for learning the language, but he didn't want to see just any generic app. He wanted to see something where, you know, you were talking in full sentences, meaningful everyday conversations. And so he did a lot of research on the different type of language apps that were out there, and he couldn't really find one that was suitable, I guess.
Mhm.
And so when he found Merixstudio, he was blown away, and he thought, wow, I think we could work with them, and I think they could develop what we have as a vision. And so he called them up, and they had a meeting, and basically we were talking about, what our vision was for this app and what we wanted to see. And they were really excited to, start this project because it was something I don't think they've really done before. And so it was really exciting. And from my point of view, I've never developed an app or assisted in developing an app before, so all of the information was quite brand new, and it was exciting to see from, where we were when we started, the middle part, and then, the end result. And just listening to Andrew, because I was chatting with him about it, and he was talking to me, and one of the things I said was like, how did the name come up? It, that means camping. And he said, well, he said, in this app, there's modules, and it's broken down into lessons, and there's exercises. And so he says there's two modules that are broken down into 7 lessons. And with those lessons, there's the Tetlet dialect that has 36 exercises. So you have to go from one exercise to the next exercise, and there's little tests that you have to do in order to move to the next exercise. And so he said it's like going from one camp to another camp to another camp before you reach your final destination, which is kind of like what the Gwichin people would have done, years, like
Mhm.
thousands, hundreds of years ago, when they lived on the land. So I was like, that's really cool. And so just thinking about it, that's kind of where we came from.
Where it
And
started.
that's,
Mhm.
yeah. So a huge thank you to Merixstudio for helping us, and a huge thank you for Andrew, who, took the initiative to start this project and continue on with it to where it's at right now.
I could see Kasia nodding her head that it was an indeed unique project. Kasia, could you elaborate on that?
Yes, certainly. So from our perspective, it was in fact very special project. On one hand, we followed some standard procedures, like we started with a workshop, a product design workshop, where we did a lot of brainstorming together and a lot of research regarding language learning apps. On the other hand, we also had some unique twists. For example, the research we've done wasn't just around the language learning apps that we would usually do, right? Just to check what is the competition, what's already been invented, developed, etc. So in this case, we knew we had to connect with the people because the target audience was very specific in this case. So we understood the importance of user testing right away, and that was one of the parts where we hoped we would get some answers as to, where lies the difficulty in the language learning process, because it's not a trivial language, as I said. An example of that is, for example, during the workshops, we were extremely naive, and one of the goals we had was to learn some Gwichin during this 3-day workshop, and we failed. because as Celina has nicely explained, it's from the well, phonetically speaking, well, it's not a trivial language, right? So depending how you put a stress on a word or how you pronounce a specific sound, it can mean a lot of things. So for us, it was it was a failure, but it actually made us realize how difficult is this task. And we understood during this process what will be the challenge in the language learning, which was a great starting point for us. So we understood that, for example, the part with the speaking and everyday conversation is really crucial in this app. So we really focused on it. We didn't cover that much from a grammatical standpoint, right? We understood that everyday conversation with the elders is really an important part of this process. What I would say was also unique was the ownership that the Gwichin Tribal Council gave us. And thank you, Celina, for all the trust from your side. So the cooperation on our side was more like sometimes it felt a little bit more like a startup enterprise, because we felt that we really could create any app, right? Given that we follow the rules of that was stated during the workshops, meaning it has to be an app that teaches you how to speak, right, and teaches you how to pronounce words, how the everyday expressions are. So it wasn't our ambition to actually make someone fluent, because we understood it's the app is not going to make it. The app is going to support you in the process and make it easier for you to repeat the vocabulary, the expressions in context, as Celina explained, right?
Now that you mentioned this ownership, I'm wondering from the business perspective, Celina, what was important to you as basically our client, to feel empowered? Because you brought in a lot of specialist knowledge, right? You brought in the idea, the cultural context, the content itself, but at the same time, as you said, you didn't have much experience developing software. So I'm wondering what, from your perspective, was important to receive from a tech partner like Merixstudio?
Well, I can't speak for Andrew, but like I said, what we were looking for in an app was that it can teach the Gwichin language in sentences, not just, one word here or one word there. We wanted something that people could practice every day with. We wanted to make sure that this app would be able to be used in schools. This app would be able to be used with, mentors and apprentices. Anybody that was able to read, can use this app, and that it would benefit them in that, they would be practicing every single day. For myself, because I had no experience in building an app, the process from when we began was very unique and very interesting. And the developers made it very informational for me. They made sure that I understood what we were doing and what steps we were in, and if we had questions, they were there to answer them. So every week they made sure they came in contact with Andrew and I, and we'd have a meeting just to see the progress of their work. And if there was something that we wanted to tweak or something we wanted to improve, obviously they were there to listen to us. Um, but thank goodness that Andrew was the one who provided all the input and all of the comments and gave direction, and even to the point of providing all of the content in the Gwichin language. And thank you to Mary Effie Snowshoe, to John Norbert, to Hannah Lexi, who was there guiding Andrew in making sure the Gwichin words were correct. So a big thank you to Merixstudio, as they were a huge help in developing this. And, you know, even having monthly meetings with one of the managers to conduct evaluations. How are we feeling about the work that they were doing? And I was absolutely not afraid to be honest, and I felt very comfortable in voicing my concerns if I had any.
Okay, so there was this confidence, and you knew basically in what direction the application was going.
Yes, we were a part of it all the way through.
Okay, Kasia, I wanted to go back to your background in linguistics. Did that help you when you worked on KaiKit?
Well, certainly, I would say I had the necessary curiosity to learn to approach a new language, and I just wanted to understand what is the difficulty in learning Gwichin and how to focus on it. So I understood that learning a language is a tough job, actually, because there is a lot of mundane task, I would say. So every day you do the same, you repeat the same process. So so from my perspective, it was a very interesting journey, and the fact that I actually like learning languages, and I would say this is my hobby, helped a lot, because I could look at this app from, I would say, a little bit higher level. So not just as a structure of lesson by lesson, but trying to understand from methodology how to approach learning a language. So that was certainly a help, my background.
And if you think about language learning applications in general, there are dozens of them on the market, literally.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and for some of them, the features are quite similar. Sometimes there is something unique. But I'm wondering, how did you approach the process of picking functionalities for this very application? How did you choose the must-haves, and how did you manage to make them very unique?
Sure. So we did a lot of research. We have downloaded, I don't know, 7 or 8 applications for learning languages. And we did have a huge mural with all the functionalities written down with comments. Would that be applicable? Would that play out well or not? And since we downloaded those apps, we were sitting together trying to understand what would bring us closer to the goal of learning language such as Gwichin. So in this case, we took an example of Duolingo app. And maybe not all of you are familiar, but they have introduced Navajo language in 2018. So we took this language and Duolingo app as a benchmark. So what we did was we sat together and tried to do it lesson by lesson. And afterwards, we discussed, for example, if the number of repetitions, the number of new words was correct. And we tried to match it with Gwichin and check, if you are a first time learner of Gwichin, would that be overwhelming for you or not? So based on materials and the materials from Andrew, we tried to put them together in form of exercises and check if we have enough content, for example, for covering this part of material or not. And also an important part was Gwichin, as stated many times, is not an easy, trivial language. So what we try to do is incorporate some fun element to it, right? So it shouldn't be a very boring, I don't know, black and white or very standard generic app. We really try to focus on the visual part and entertaining part, and also keeping the users engaged, because we tried to motivate them to to finish the lessons, as well as during the lesson, we also gave them incentives to keep going because we thought it was important. And based on our experience with Navajo, we understood that after a couple of repetitions where you just don't know the answer and the answer is false one by one, you get discouraged. So yeah, that was our extensive process, I would say, with trial and error.
Okay, so you really tried to step into the shoes of your users.
Oh yes, definitely, yes.
Staying in the topic of the application itself, if you were to pinpoint the most unique parts of it, what would it be? The content, the design, the features? Celina, what do you find the most exciting and the most unique about this application?
I think it's all of it combined. The way they created the app, like how it looks, the design of it. When you first sign on, it asks you all of these questions, whether you know your name, your gender, your if you're intermediate, if you're beginner, if you're fluent, and going through the exercises, it just and the process of going there and trying to get to the end. That would be my end goal, is that I have to finish this because I started it. I don't want the app to come back and say, "Hey, Celina, it's been 2 days." you know so that's why I think it's very unique in that sense, is that, and going from stage to stage, right, in the exercises, into the modules, but also knowing that we can continue to add more content, and later on down the road, adding our own pictures of our own people. That's exciting for me.
Okay. Kasia, I know that you have some designs with you. Could you actually share them and take us through the journey that the user also goes on to?
Certainly, I do not have everything. So
we don't want to spoil the surprise.
No, certainly not. So as Celina described, maybe I would focus on this first screen for 1 second. What we have here is the logo of the application, and I just wanted to give you a little bit of a backstory behind this. So this is, of course, a speech bubble, as you all can see. But this speech bubble consists of little colorful beads, and this is not a coincidence. So we have designed this in a way that those beads were an important part of a tribal culture, right? So every tribe had a specific beads structure attached to the clothes, and this represented the uniqueness of each tribe. So we tried to reuse this element into this first screen, into the logo of the app, saying that this is not just a language learning app. This is really immersed in the Gwichin culture. And Celina already mentioned the little questionnaire that we have at the beginning. So what actually prompted us to create it was our curiosity as to who is actually using this app. And we wanted to learn a little bit more about, for example, the motivation of the users. So we have put some possible motivations that the users might have. Right now, we just gather this data, but the idea is, based on the feedback from the users, we might actually go into different directions, right? So if everyone, for example, wanted to see a little bit more of the heritage part of the app, it would be a good idea to actually incorporate more elements of it in the future versions. And the screen on the right-hand side is the dialect selection. So Celina already mentioned this, but I wanted to point this out, that we understand that there are not so many speakers of Gwichin, and yet the difficulty lies in two dialects that are there, and the app actually covers both of them. So the user can select which of the dialects they would like to go with.
And can I just add something?
Sure.
In the process of developing this, we did reach out to individuals within the communities, and we had asked them to download the app. They were given instructions on how to download the app and just to test it, to try it out, and they did. And we had them actually on live within one of our meetings just to get their point of view. And I guarantee you, every person that we asked to test this app was so excited, and they couldn't wait for it to come out, and it was just so exciting at that part, to know that this is going to be something great. Yeah.
Great to hear this, Celina, really. Yeah, and that's basically the first thing after the little onboarding questionnaire that the user will see. So Celina already mentioned that we designed this as a journey. So taking a look at the cultural aspect of the culture of the Gwichin culture and language and Gwichin people, we understood that many times they just needed to move from one place to another, and learning new things, learning new words, learning about the nature was a part of the process. So in designing this, we took that element into account and created this little camping. And as you progress into the app, you reach other areas of the land, and the landscape changes, right? So that was this little element that we added, and the camps, the color of the camps was also important, I would say, in a way that we wanted to indicate when do the users actually, when have they reached the camp and the little tents are closed, whereas if they have already covered some of the materials, the tents are open to them, right? Because they have they are no longer a mystery to them. Yeah. All right. And moving on to the part with the exercises. So we have selected a couple of types of the exercises. We have just put 3 types in this presentation. So once again, in a lot of cases, we didn't just want the people to learn single words, because if they just learned a single word, they wouldn't possibly be able to reuse it in the future, right? And our goal, once again, was to make the communication skills more fluent. So we have used some of the imagery to make it more entertaining, but also the users would need to create a sentence from a random order of words. And the third actually screen shows is a little simulation, I would say, of a everyday conversation that you would have. So what we did with the exercises, it might be worth mentioning, is we started the lessons with just hearing and reading exercises. So we put the audio, we showed how how words, expressions are written. You could play it and understand and get a little bit more familiar. And once you progressed with the materials, you got more and more difficult types of exercises, so that you wouldn't be overwhelmed with the content that is pretty unusual, maybe pretty difficult, challenging. Yeah. And one of the last things I wanted to say is functionality that we have developed, which is a dictionary, and it sounds a little bit dull, I know, but I wanted to highlight this because, as Celina mentioned, there are 6 editions of the dictionary, but I don't believe they are interactive, right, Celina?
No, not
So
at this point.
exactly. So what we try to achieve with this functionality is to give people actually online access to the application and check the words if they have doubts, if they, as Celina said, have 2 minutes of free time, or maybe there is something at the back of their mind, that they want to check a specific word. Now they can. So a regular, I would say, functionality that is nothing new. Actually, I think that brought a lot of value to this project specifically. Okay, so the last part with the presentation is that we tried to cover even the empty states in a fun and entertaining way, and the last picture shows that the lesson is downloading. So what I wanted to say here is we have prepared the app so that each module you can download it and then access this on offline, which was one of the requirements, because actually maybe in not all of the region the access to the internet is that stable, right? So what we wanted to prevent is for people to stop doing the lessons just because of the internet. So something that we cannot control. So this is what we did.
Yeah, I'm sure that this preview made our audience hungry for more. So there will be many downloads coming in soon. Before we move on, I wanted to remind you, those who are watching us and listening to us, that you can leave questions for my guests in the chat box. Feel free to do this. Okay, and I'm wondering, because Gwichin is a very complex language, and it definitely wasn't easy to build an application for learning it. What was the most challenging part of creating KaiKit? Celina, from your perspective, what was the biggest challenge?
I think for me, it was just the building of it, because I had no experience in app development myself. And, as we walked through the process, like I said, Merixstudio really contributed a lot to what I didn't know. But you know, I think also the content, inputting the content into the app, making sure that, if the user said, okay, you're asking a question and, is it going to be correct? Making sure that was there. And then also the audio. So doing the audio for the Tetlet version and doing the audio for the Gwich'in version, that was very time consuming. And thanks to Andrew who uploaded everything. He said it was, he was working for hours on a day, and there was little instances where there was, problems, and he had to go back to Merixstudio and say, okay, look, this is what's happening. So I think it's just that in general.
Kasia, how about you? What did you find the most challenging about this project?
I think the complexity of the language is an important challenge in this case, because as you may imagine, when we were designing and putting the content in the app, it wasn't always easy for us to check if it's correct or not. As Celina mentioned, we did not want any mistakes, because one of the worst things you may do is actually make someone learn a word or expression in a wrong way, because in this case relearning is really tough, right? So that was, of course, one of the things. The other was making the application quite fun for people, however difficult the learning path might be. Another challenge, I would say, was accessing the target group, because from the designer's perspective, people during, for example, conferences, they always tell you, oh, you know, if you look close enough, or if you are patient enough, there are always people who you can test this application or your project with, right? There is always a target group. And in this case, it was extremely limited. And it was not as easy as we imagined, right? So we once again were a little bit naive in thinking that we might test this application with dozens of people. We couldn't, right?
And
So
I have to add to that too, is that, you know, with the time difference between
exactly,
Canada and Sweden, or
Poland.
Poland, sorry, there was, you know, a difficulty because there was times where I'd have to get up, you know, and come to the office before 8 a.m., you
Yeah,
know, and so I had to get my girls up, you know, my daughter and my niece up, and thank goodness for them that, you know, they were like, okay, we're going to the office, you're going to start work, you know. But it was for like the average person too, that was difficult to connect with them too, because, you
certainly.
know, we didn't know whether they had the internet, so we had to make sure all of that, you know, fit in.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Exactly,
And
exactly.
and one of the things I have to say is that when this app does go live, I'm looking for feedback. I know I'm going to get feedback. And I'm going to get, and I don't mind, because it's going to be perfecting the app, right? So I'm excited for that part as well.
Great.
Okay, so we discussed the challenges. So the other thing that I have to ask you about is about the things that were most rewarding for you. What was it?
So for me, I would say a lot of things. So one thing was that it was really a thing that was well, working on the project was one of those moments where you know you're making a difference, right? So you're not making any commercial application. And of course, we haven't mentioned this, but this application is free, right? So anyone can download it. There are no premium paid features. This is open to everyone. So so working on such a project was a great experience to me. Also, having all of the ownership that the Gwichin Tribal Council gave us was a really great experience. And on top of design perspective, I would say that well, it's great if every project teaches you something about the word, right? So I was not familiar with, for example, the whole tough era in the Canadian history, right, with the residential schools. So that really gave me a perspective. It taught me a lot about the culture of Canada, about about the aspects I was never aware of, right? So that was extremely rewarding, personally, I would say.
And Celina, how about you?
Well, I think just by going through this app, and seeing the outcome, for my personal stuff, you know, at home, I really put my foot down with my daughter and my niece. So, you know, the first thing in the morning, you wake up, the first thing I tell them is Van Gwinzi. You know, I'm trying to get them used to using the language every single day, and, you know, explaining the importance of where we come from and why the language is so important. So when I think of this app, you know, I could see my child, my daughter and my niece on this app every day and coming to me and saying, "Hey, mom, like, look at this. You were a part of that." And I'll be like, "Yes, I was," you know, and, you know, if they could, if they could, you know, advertise this, you know, to their peer groups, you know, to especially to the Gwichin kids, that this exists, and, you know, we could learn Gwichin together. Like, how amazing would that be? You know, but I'm also in the hopes that this will go into the schools, that it would go into our mentors and apprentices who are currently using the language, and just to anyone in general. Like, I plan on showing this to the elders that were a part of it, and showing what they contributed to words, and how they how they're going to make a difference in people's lives, just by doing this, just by going through the app and trying to learn as much as they can.
So I think the beauty of this project is that it actually makes a difference.
I would say it, to some extent, it's a library of the language, severely endangered language. So that's really unique about it. And when Celina was describing the feedback she's getting, I would like to add maybe a little bit to that point. So when we were performing the user testing part, it was extremely rewarding to see that people were very positive towards the app, and they were excited to have it. And we had comments like, "Oh, I would like to use it in my everyday routine," right? So that was extremely rewarding.
Good. It's really inspiring, to listen to the story of this application, this project, and I hope it gets the popularity it deserves. Okay, so I think I'm out of questions for now, but I can see that there is at least one for you. That's from Marta, and she's asking about the most challenging part of language revitalization. What is the toughest part of it? And I think it's a good one for Celina.
Right now, I think promoting the language, we need to be out there promoting the language. We need to send the message of how important that, this is our livelihood. This is where we come from. This is our identity. So for me to go on social media and, give reasons why the language is so important, create posters with, elders on why they think the language is so important. Those are messages that we want to pass on, not only to the younger generation, but to everybody. We have a language nest in Inuvik, and it's geared towards 3 and 4 year olds. And right now they're in it's daycare, but it's a language nest, and they're immersed in the language 7.5 hours a day. And listening, I've run into some of their parents on the street, because Inuvik is a small town, less than 3,500 people. And they're talking to me about the language nest and how their grandchild is in there, or how their child is in there. And the children are coming home using the language, you know? And the other part of that is we're supposed to be having parent language lessons as well. But just to know that these kids are picking it up, their little brains are just sponges, and they're just, absorbing it. That's promoting the language, and getting out there, using social media to get the language out there. From a department, we have a lot of people who are really interested in the Gwichin language. They have their own Facebook social media platforms. They have Instagram, where they're taking pictures and they're writing out the language and explaining what it is. And now there's TikTok. And so people are now using TikTok as, like, spreading the language, the awareness, and getting out there and telling people, you need to learn your language. There's nothing wrong with it. Don't be ashamed of it. Like, let's do this together. And so we do have a lot of Gwichin participants, and they have thousands of followers. Like, I follow them just to listen and to see how far they've come. And also, when we talk about language revitalization, we need to continue to build resources. We need to make resources available for all of our Gwichin participants. But also, working with the college here in Inuvik, maybe to develop a Gwichin class for people who can take that. Because, if I had a class that, that was in person, and it was 3 times a week, I would make the time to go there and be with other people and learn off of other people as well. I think that would be so exciting. And if that class could have a graduation end date, and you could be recognized for that, that would be amazing. And that's like something that I'm definitely going to be working on in the very near future. Yeah.
I can see that there's one more question to you, Celina.
Before we go, maybe I would like to add one sentence, right?
Sure.
So I think from my perspective and observing the work of Celina and the Gwichin tribal, probably the one of the challenges is bridging the gap between generations, because you have kids at schools who are exposed to Gwichin right now, and the awareness of the language is more visible, and you have the elders, right, who speak fluently the language, right? And in between those generations are probably the silent generations who can understand the language, possibly, but they have trouble speaking it, right? So I would imagine that that bridging the gap between those two generations is it must be a huge challenge.
It is. And one of the things I'll add to that, like I said before, speaking with individuals who understand the language but don't speak it, a lot of it comes back to how they were made to feel when they were speaking the language. And, it's I think we definitely need a lot of counseling in that part, and especially for language learners, because the feeling of being ashamed or being scared because you think someone is going to reprimand you for that, um, that's what we're dealing with right now. And I listen to the elders and talking to them about it, and they understand what's happening. So that's definitely something that we have to look at. And how could we help them? How could we support them?
Certainly.
Yeah, actually, this next question relates a bit to what you've just said, Celina, because it's about the significance of language preservation from the First Nations perspective. Because I know that language revitalization is one of your main goals at the Gwichin Tribal Council. Could you, tell us briefly a bit more about, this importance, these goals from the First Nations perspective?
Sure. So, when we talk about, an endangered language and how do we preserve it, from the Gwich'in Tribal Council's mandate, and I'm just going to read this to you. The Gwich'in Tribal Council's Language Revitalization Department was created to work with individuals and organizations within the four communities, Aklavik, Fort McPherson, Sigaychik, and Inuvik, to make language learning accessible through projects and programs. The department is developing archival materials for the use by the communities and continuously creating new resources for language instructors to use when teaching the Gwichin language. Our vision statement is the Gwichin are a culturally vibrant and independent nation that is environmentally responsible and socially, economically, and politically self-reliant. Our mission statement is the Gwichin protect and advance their interests through the hard work, collaborative approaches, and good governance in order to improve the lives and preserve the culture of the Gwichin. And when we look at the key responsibilities of this department, one of them is collecting, recording, cataloging, protecting, digitizing, and sharing Gwichin resources. So when we think about that, our department is looking at language teaching resources. How do we create them? Who is our partners? Printing media, audio resources is a big one, like I said before. Computer-based tools, reference materials, including dictionaries, grammar tools, and transcription. And even when I talk about the dictionaries, the 6 editions, one of our goals is to combine all of them into one document, so it's just there, and then having the audio to go along with it, so it's available not just to the people within the Gwichin settlement area, but it's there for everybody, all the beneficiaries around the world. The second role is increase opportunities for authentic language learning in a safe and supportive environment. Like I said, we have online classes, and if people are interested in joining, like send me a message and I'll make sure to get you in contact with the instructors. And like I said, if we could have Gwichin classes, if we could have online classes, you know, 3 times a week, 4 times a week, that would be so ideal. And, having classmates to to practice on, calling them up or going on Zoom or, meeting in person, going for a walk, you're practicing the language. So that was one of our goals. And number 3 was increase the importance of the Gwichin language, providing expertise, advice, and recommendations to the chief operating officer on language related matters and issues. So, we're preparing reports based on what we see in the communities. We're identifying and applying for sources of funding for language programs. And we get funded from the government of the Northwest Territories, which I'm very grateful for, and it's to use the money is to use for learning resources, for learning the Gwichin language, for promoting it, and then the last one is increase the opportunity for sharing resources across regions and organizations. So. Creating children's books. We have 3 children's books right now that are in the Gwichin language, and that was given to some of the schools. I still have to make deliveries to the other ones as well. But that's another project that we're working on too, is, all of the elders that have passed away, they have stories that they documented from when they were when they were 5 years old, and trying to bring those alive and trying to bring them back to the community so the kids know where their elders came from and what the era that they came from, where they were totally living off the land. So yeah, sorry if I
Yes,
was rambling on.
yeah, a lot of meaningful job.
Yeah. And again, creating the printed and recorded information using audio is so important, and I just can't stress that enough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And the one other thing is, finding qualified instructors to teach the language. There's a lot of people out there that speak the language, but, to be a teacher, you need to go to school.
Yeah.
So we need to look for courses that we can bring into the community for people that are interested in teaching the language so they could find an effective way of doing so. And with that said, I have to talk about this textbook that was created. It's called the Gwicha Dinji Ju Kyu book, and it's basically learning the language from a beginner's point of view. And it's 278 pages back and front.
Mhm.
And there's one topic for everything, but it's in like sentence format. So you learn a word, but then it's used in a sentence, and you have to practice that. And at the end of that, you have a little exercise to do, a little quiz before you could move on. And so I'm excited to see that because it's being published right now. I saw the outcome, the book, and it was just so exciting to see it like as a real live document. And I'm hoping to have it mailed to me by beginning of May. And so then I can distribute it out to the people that are currently learning the language, but also give it out to the schools, the Aboriginal language instructors as well.
Sounds really exciting, very practical. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed for the success of that.
Mhm.
Okay, I think we're running out of time. So to finish, I wanted to really thank you, Kasia, Celina, for accepting our invitation and taking part in this discussion. I think it was very, very informative, very educational, and our audience learned a lot about Gwichin, language revitalization, and the ways in which technology can support this. Thank you very much for accepting this invitation.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a really great hour, and I really enjoyed talking about language revitalization. So thank you.
Thank you. Right. It was really interesting to talk about the project again, as it's been a couple of months from my perspective since I finished my part of the Gwichin journey. So it was really nice to refresh my memory about this project.
Yeah, and it was very interesting to talk to you about it. So just to finish off, I wanted to remind our audience that the session was being recorded, so there will be a recording for you if you want to rewatch it later on. And thank you for joining us, and see you soon, I hope. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.